We tend to view history from the top down. We track the borders that shift and the treaties signed in capital cities. But those massive decisions eventually roll downhill, landing on people who had no seat at the table. This is Catherine Scott Brown. Born in 1886, she never held public office or commanded an army, but the autobiography she left behind serves as a ground-level map of the 20th century. Over the course of her life, Catherine's reality was repeatedly shattered by massive, uncontrollable events. Every time she achieved stability, a geopolitical shockwave wiped it out, forcing her to choose between total collapse or total reinvention. Her diary documents exactly how everyday people absorb the collateral damage of policies made hundreds of miles away. Catherine's earliest memories were of an ordinary 1890s childhood on a high-desert farm in Utah. She spent her days riding the farm team around the yard and watching her father work as a section boss for the railroad. Then, the federal government began a massive crackdown on plural marriage. Catherine's father had a second wife. Almost overnight, her family lived in constant watch for a small black buggy carrying U.S. marshals down the long, straight road to their home. The manhunt intensified. Marshals raided their home in the dark, searching even the flower bins. Her father had to abandon his secure $10-a-day job and go into hiding, instantly plunging the family into poverty. With no income and prison looming, the family fled. They packed into a covered wagon, traveling over steep, treacherous dirt grades to cross the international border into the rugged mountains of Chihuahua, Mexico. A single federal policy shift in Washington, D.C. wiped out a comfortable American family. They were now destitute international refugees, dumped into a foreign wilderness to fight for their survival. The Mexican frontier was brutal. Sickness tore through their crowded adobe house, and without a doctor available, Catherine survived deadly diphtheria, while her sister did not. Yet, over a decade, she clawed her way back, marrying and building a successful cattle and mercantile business. By 1911, the Madera Revolution swept across Mexico, a civil war aimed at ousting longtime dictator Porfirio Diaz. The geopolitical conflict arrived at Catherine's doorstep. Heavily armed renegade bands lined her fences, demanding the family's essential supplies at gunpoint. Catherine had to tear up unbleached muslin to make bags for the soldiers to carry away her coffee, sugar, and beans. In exchange, the rebels handed her entirely worthless revolutionary currency. She had spent 10 years working out of extreme poverty. Now, a foreign civil war she had no part in erased her hard-won stability in a matter of hours. In July 1912, the situation completely collapsed. A runner arrived on horseback with immediate orders. The American colonists had to evacuate the country. The logistics were chaotic. They were allowed one trunk per family. The men had to stay behind to guard the property, while Catherine packed her 6 children onto wagons and headed for the railroad. The train journey was dangerous. Catherine was forced to smuggle 30-30 rifles and ammunition past Revolutionary officers, traveling in dark cars while the railroad bridges just behind them were detonated by rebel forces. They crossed the U.S. border at midnight, arriving in El Paso. With barely $50 to her name, Catherine and her children were crammed into an overcrowded Oddfellows hall, sleeping on the floor with zero resources. Decades earlier, her family fled the United States to survive. Now she fled Mexico to survive. She was an impoverished refugee once again, this time inside her own homeland. For the next decade, the family lived a nomadic existence. They moved across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, hauling water in wagons and farming dry plots of land to keep their children fed. The physical toll was devastating. Her infant son Wilburn died of disease. Years later, her 12-year-old son Melvin was crushed to death beneath the heavy wheels of a wheat wagon. Then came the late 1920s. As the national economy began its downward spiral into the Great Depression, Catherine's husband Samuel was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The primary breadwinner was now incapacitated. With medical bills mounting and the job market disintegrating, they had zero financial safety net. Global events and personal tragedy were now perfectly aligned against her survival. Catherine moved to Los Angeles and took a job in a factory, sewing bias tape onto dresses for $1.50 a dozen, just to afford her husband's mounting medical care. She didn't stay in the factory. Catherine went back to school, updated her credentials, and eventually took over the local brick schoolhouse. She became the principal and teacher, securing a steady income for her family. In 1938, a partial reparation payment finally arrived from the Mexican government for the property they lost decades earlier. Catherine used it to buy a home and business in Arizona, eventually being appointed as a U.S. postmaster. Against all odds, she raised a sprawling family. Her children went on to become educators, bishops, and diplomats. Sweeping geopolitical shifts dictate the circumstances we navigate, but Catherine's diary shows that while global forces can destroy a life, they don't necessarily get the final word on how it ends.